Hi and welcome back to the Witching Hour Audio YouTube channel. My name's Sean. Thanks for joining me again today. Today's video is all about how to acoustically treat your studio space. Many of you, like me, might be working in a less than ideal environment. This room, for example, is a 3x3 bedroom, and the roof starts at 3 meters and slopes to about 4 meters at its highest. Very lucky to have a space dedicated to music, and we are all working within real-world constraints. So I've gone about learning a few ins and outs of how to acoustically treat a space, how sound works in a room, and today's video really is about passing on what I've learned and how to make your room as solid sounding as possible so that you can have mixes that translate, or you can track yourself in your room with better sound quality. The main goal for acoustically treating your space is you want what comes out of your speakers to be a truthful representation of what the audio actually sounds like. And then if you're mixing and making decisions based on that, then it'll translate out into the real world and you won't get any nasty surprises when you take it to your car or pop it in your headphones or whatever. This comes from someone speaking that has had those issues multiple times, and there's nothing more heartbreaking than being happy with what things sound like in your space and then taking it out and it just all falls apart. We're going to start by speaking about why you might want to acoustically treat your room in the first place. If you're working on headphones, none of this matters and it's completely irrelevant. So if you're doing work that works for you in headphones, great. I often work in headphones too, and I find them really cool. But the best thing about working in studio monitors is that you get a really natural depiction of the sound. You get a really beautiful mid-channel and balanced out with the sides, and a really clear image of what's actually happening with your music. And for me, it feels natural, and it is a lovely way to work. And I find the translation especially good once you get your room right. Just for reference, in this space here, I'm working on some Kelly Audio IN5s, which are 3-way 5-inch monitors, and I've also got the matching Kelly Audio WS6.2 Sub. And that set up together in this small space especially, I've found produces really great results. So beginning with speaker placement, it's ideal to have your speakers off your desk and on stands for a few reasons. First of all, if they're sitting on your desk, you're very limited to where you can place them, and also you'll get some resonance coming through the speakers and resonating onto your desk. In terms of where to place your speakers, essentially you want to make an equilateral triangle between the two monitors and your head. So the distance between the monitors themselves and then the distance from either monitor to your head should be the same, essentially creating a triangle that's the same length on all sides. Depending on which monitors you're using, they may have an ideal distance that they're optimal for. I believe the Kelly IN5s are somewhere between 1 meter and 1.5 meters, and I think I am sitting currently at about 1.18 meters. You also don't want to be positioned with your head in the very center of the room. There is a theory that 38% into the room is where your head should be. I found for me it was optimal at about 30% into the room. So really treat that as a starting point and just experiment and see what works best for you. So in terms of acoustic panels and treatment itself, we need to put that in place for two main reasons. The first reason is to stop our cancellation from the reflections of our walls. So essentially, the thing we want to hear is the direct sound from our speakers, but sound's omnidirectional. So as it fires from your monitors, it actually goes out in all directions and bounces off all the surfaces in your room. And what's going to happen is your monitor will be shooting sounds, of course, directly into your ears, but they're also going to be firing in the direction of the closest wall. And that being quite close to your listening position will bounce from that wall back to your ears. And with it having such a short time of that reflection hitting your ears, you won't hear it as separate sounds, but it will blend together. And what happens is it will distort the sound and your frequency will be skewed, because as they bounce from the wall back to your ears and blend with the sound directly from your speakers, it'll cancel out some frequencies will become stronger, so you'll end up with all these peaks and dips that are not part of the actual audio that you want to be hearing. So we will look at putting our acoustic panels on that first reflection point of this wall, on the other wall on the other side, but also your roof, because it's going to bounce straight from that and hit you as a first reflection point too. The other reason to create acoustic panels and place them in your room is you want to absorb a lot of the sound that will be bouncing all around the room. Essentially, if you have a short hard sound like a snare drum, which does have its own natural sustain, but that sound would normally play and then die naturally. In a room that's untreated, what will happen is the echo of that sound will continue bouncing around the room. So acoustic treatment in your room, if done effectively, will really shorten that reverb time, and you won't have this muddy mess of sound bouncing around the room in a way that's destructive to what you're hearing. So they're the main reasons to treat your room. You'll also have the benefit of, if you're tracking in this room, you won't have all that room sound bouncing back into your mic if you're doing your vocals and things like that too. And you'll get much more of your direct sound, which is how things should sound when we're tracking things like vocals directly. In terms of building the panels, I've built what we would call fairly deep broadband absorbers. And essentially it just means, instead of targeting one specific frequency, I've aimed to get these panels to absorb as much into the low frequency as possible, and they'll also absorb a lot of the high frequency in a really balanced way. You see in a lot of studio photos and things like that where people fill their rooms with very thin acoustic foam, and the main reason for them being not effective is acoustic foam being so thin will absorb really only your high frequencies. I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4K and above. And so if you put too much of that into your room, essentially you will be killing off all that high frequency, which in some cases you want. There can be too much of that energy, but you're leaving untreated all your middles, all your lows. And so your room then becomes really unbalanced because you have all this treatment affecting the high end, and that is still leaving all the mid and down. So essentially you have your room sounding quite dead, but also still boomy, still reverberating around the room in your low end, and it'll sound quite awful. So instead I've opted to go for really thick broadband absorbers, and the thicker your material is of each panel, the lower into the frequency range it extends. So all of the ones I've built in this room are somewhere between 6 inches thick and some 8 or 9 inches thick. Now what these also have is an air gap behind them, and from what I understand, having an air gap behind your panels allows them to be even more effective. It's kind of like having that extra acoustic foam in the space of the air gap. Something to do with the way the velocity slows down. I don't fully understand it, but I do know that the air gap does allow them to extend further down into your frequency range. If you want to go deep in this, most of the stuff I've gained from a channel called Acoustics Insider, with a much cleverer person than me called Jesko Lohan. The guy's done a heap of podcasts, videos. His channel's been incredibly beneficial to me. So if you really want to go learn a lot more, there's a lot of Q&A, etc. So I'm just going to highly recommend that channel, and yeah, thank him through here for all the information he's put out freely. It's really helped me get this room sounding great. How to build the panels themselves. I'm also going to reference another YouTube channel called In The Mix, because when I was looking at how to do these for my own room, I found a video on that channel and based what I've created on what I learned on that channel. So essentially, I'm going to put all of this in terms of our Australian stores. So in Australia, a lot of us go to Bunnings for our building supplies, and we're making a frame, and I've chosen to build my frames out of untreated pine. Thickness-wise, they're maybe about that thick, and of course, width-wise thickness will be whatever you want your absorber thickness to be. So most of mine are about a hand length, maybe 6, some are even thicker, up to 8 inches, and then the length will that be determined by the size of your room and how wide and tall you want them to be. So essentially, these panels are built using a frame just screwed together with wood screws. I've braced them with some metal corner fittings. And then I went down to Spotlight, another Australian store, and spent more time in Spotlight than I have in years, and found a product called duck cloth, which I found really good because you can stretch it a little, but most importantly, it's quite porous. The holes in the material themselves are pretty prominent, and what that allows to happen is the sound can pass through that absorber and get caught by acoustic material. If it was too solid, your material, then a lot of the sound would bounce back off. So you want it to have some holes and be breathable so that the sound can actually travel and get absorbed by your panel. As far as construction goes, once I've made my frame, essentially turn it on its face, and using a staple gun, I'm going to staple the material inside and stretch it along top, bottom, and the sides. I found having thin sheets of cardboard that I cut allowed me to make like a lip that I could pull under and then staple. And that allowed, they got better as I built more of them, but it allowed for a nice clean stretching sort of edge of the material. And then once you're inside there, turn it onto its front and you're going to fill it with your insulation material. Did a bit of research and I found Bunnings stock something called North Earth Wool. North is Knauf. And they all have an absorptive rating. I went with the one that was 2.5 as far as its density goes. And essentially it comes in solid kind of bats, and you can cut these with a wood saw. They are better than most fiberglass materials, but they still have a slight irritant, so it's probably good to protect your hands and things while you're building them. But yeah, you essentially stack your panel filled with these. Once they're all packed in with another sheet of duck cloth stapled along the back. The back of mine aren't anywhere near as pretty as the front, but they do the job. For a couple of mine, I've also chosen to put them on casters so I can move them around the room. And you might see them in the vocal video I did earlier, but you can position them to be behind you as a vocalist so that the mic isn't picking up reflections from the back wall, which makes them doubly useful. Then in my room, I've placed one in each of the first reflection points I said, so one on either side of the wall and one on the roof above me. Speaking of the roof, I was quite amazed at how much of a difference that made. It was one of the last things that I put up, but to me, I especially noticed it in the upper mids. Anything like distorted guitars, everything on tracks that I knew sounded great, just sounded so much smoother and easier to listen. So I believe there might have been some boundary interference messing with the frequencies there, but they really did make a big difference. So also should mention there's something called the mirror trick you can do. So if you on your wall put yourself in your listening position and then have your speaker where it will be. And then if you have someone run a mirror, anywhere from your listening position that you can see the speaker is a point where that sound will bounce from that speaker back to your head. So you want to cover those positions, called your point of first reflection, with some insulation panels to stop those first reflections. So for me, the most prominent ones were one on each wall and then one on the roof. So that's really important. It's also worth noting that you should build a few of these for your corners as thick as possible, and they'll act as bass traps. Bass does build up in the corners of the room. I think the energy sort of collides there and creates a bass buildup. So for me, for example, I've got fairly solid ones in my front corners. I can't put them in my back corners because in one corner I've got a bed and a door in the other. So instead I've just filled the back wall with as many panels as possible to help with some of the reflectivity of the room as well. So hopefully that helps with the building. It's probably worth mentioning if you're going to put one above your head to really be safety conscious. You want to screw hooks into studs and use things that are really solid. I've got some wire that's rated for 45 kilos, which is obviously overkill for the panel that's up there, but please ensure you're being safe if something like that falls. It's obviously extremely hazardous to your health, so take care. I mentioned speaker placement earlier. We talked a little about that. I've also got a subwoofer in this room. It was really important to me that I could hear into the low frequencies. It wasn't about getting more oomph out of the bass in the room. I just wanted to be able to hear that range from about 30 to 50 hertz more clearly than I was without the subwoofer. I found getting the speaker placement, it wasn't too bad. I've got the subwoofer roughly in line with my speakers. I did try moving it forward, back, same with the speakers. The Kali IN5s have boundary switches that you can flick to suit where you place them in the room. So I find doing a lot of experimenting is the best way to go. If you want to measure your room and the frequencies quite quickly, I do have a room measurement microphone that came with my Sound ID reference set, which I'll talk about in a moment. But that essentially I've paired with a free software called Room EQ Wizard. Now what that does is it takes a sweep of your room and it lets you see, it's quite a complex software, I'm still learning a bit about it, but it lets you see the frequency response of your room, also measures how long your reverb time is in your room. So obviously you want that to be short and as dead as possible in most cases. But I found that was a great tool for moving my speakers or my sub forward and back from the wall, measuring the room, moving it again, measuring the room. I found with the sub forward, the real sub information was fairly smooth and strong, but there were big dips coming in certain areas, and I found as I moved it back that the whole thing smoothed out quite a bit. So I found the best position is my speakers quite close to the wall and my sub quite close to the wall, and that measured as flat as possible with the room treatment in the room and my listening position. So the final thing I want to talk about is room correction software. I've been using Sound ID Reference and a measurement mic, and you can't use that to fix an untreated room for multiple reasons. So if your room's completely untreated, the reverb time I mentioned earlier, the sound bouncing off the walls, will still happen no matter how you correct your frequency response. So even if you've got a flat room with no treatment, it's still going to be reverberating around the room, causing all sorts of problems, especially with your clarity and your tightness. So that won't be touched by room treatment. But also, if you have areas in your room that have large dips, they're being caused by frequencies in the room bumping into each other or room modes. And essentially, if you make a profile that corrects that and tries to add more in that area, you're essentially going to be pushing more into that space where there's a natural cancellation and then making the problem worse. Now, in my room, I measured, once I had everything in and set up, that it was quite flat and smooth, but there was a boost at about 50 hertz, and it was significant. I think it was maybe 7 or 8 decibels. And to my understanding, room correction's a lot more efficient at pulling sounds out, because you can essentially say, I want less of the bass being put out into the room. So my frequency curve will remove some of that excess area and keep it nice and flat. As far as I can tell, it works very well. For anyone that hasn't done any sort of room treatment before, essentially you have a measurement mic and you check your measurement of your speakers, you put it in your listening position, and then it asks you to move all around the room and measures the frequency response at multiple different positions, and it creates a profile of how your room sounds, and then you have an EQ curve that will attempt to flatten out the frequency response of your whole room. And to my ears, it really does make things a lot smoother, a lot clearer. The phase is improved as well, and I find the center image is much stronger with it on. So yeah, I do use it with my setup. So that was quite a long video. I hope this serves as some kind of introduction just to get you going with treating your own room. I hope it helps understand why it's important. Those resources I mentioned will take you a lot further than this video does. If you want to look much further into it, it is a bit of a rabbit hole. It will take hours of your life, but the best thing is once you're done and you've got it to a point where you can be confident in your sound, everything really just does become a lot more enjoyable, and you have a lot more faith while you're working that what you're hearing is accurate, which makes you more confident, and it just produces better results. So yeah, thanks for following along. I'd love a subscribe or a like. That really helps keep the channel growing, and just pass this on to anyone that you think might find it useful. But otherwise, thanks for joining me again today.